Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Hello again, Patrick.
Hello. I was doing a silent countdown and I was at 5 and you started.
All right, it's time to go. Let's go.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about the dichotomy of healing, or the conflict of healing, or the difference of healing between the betrayed partner and the addicted partner.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing that comes up a lot. I think, let's explain what it is first, and let's talk about how people feel about it. So you find out that your spouse has an acting out, or they come and confess. You have a discovery or confession. And now all of a sudden your world is absolutely destroyed. It's blown up. You're in shock. You're trying to figure out what's going on. Meanwhile, they're over in the kitchen whistling a happy tune because they've just gotten the support that they need. They've connected with a therapist. They're in a support group. They've finally discovered that there's a way out of their addiction, and they've been sober for like 14 days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And like, I bring up the whistling because we were just talking about that earlier. I was like, oh yeah, we were listening to a podcast where someone was describing her process of recovery. And I can't remember what she said, something about, oh yeah, like revenge thoughts, or like thoughts about like, you're not allowed to be happy. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember like you were so happy. And I was like, how dare you in the first couple weeks?
Yeah.
Because I was like, you're not allowed to sit there or stand there and whistle while my life is destroyed and like going up in flames over here.
Now, just to be clear, I wasn't like, yay, I'm happy. I was, you're
trying to live your life.
To break it down. No, not necessarily trying to, I was this thing that I abhorred, that I wanted to try to find a way I wasn't doing, right? So you start to feel good about that.
Well, you were very happy. I mean, had we not been married, and this was a process you went through by yourself, and somehow it had come out and you got help, and you would have been absolutely delighted with no.
Oh yeah. Of course. I mean, but I was aware of the consequences. I was aware of I believe I was pretty aware of the damage, and
this was so early. This was literally, I think, within the first couple weeks, where it was like, you are not allowed to whistle. How dare you whistle?
Mm-hmm.
It was not good. It just, I was like, how could you be happy in a time like this, And I felt like it was very disrespectful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, so there is this dichotomy of healing. So on the addict side, a guy that doesn't like what he has done and wants to recover, when they get into recovery, they feel very, very happy.
They do. Yeah.
And for the betrayed spouse, they're like, I was living a life in what I thought was peace and calm and happiness. And right now it's total destruction and chaos. Literally everything in my life is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this weird reality thing of like, okay, like if you were to say, but in the present moment, nothing bad is happening, right? Okay, but that's not how that works in betrayal recovery, because we didn't get to live reality in the time that it was happening.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get to process the cheating while it was happening.
Yeah.
We didn't get to do any of that. And so we have to process it later. And that's where it becomes this very weird sense of the addict then having to live both worlds, the world of, hey, everything's going great in my recovery and I feel lighter and freer and happier than I ever have, while simultaneously trying to manage the fact that I've destroyed my partner's safety and everything that comes with that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think, the message really is, you can, for the addict, you can exist in both spots. You can, and you should be happy. You should be happy that you're engaging finally in a pattern of recovery, and you're starting to see that. But I think it takes a little bit of judgment to say, okay, how are you going to manifest that? Maybe you don't have the boys over to watch a basketball game and drink beers on week 2. You know what I mean? That might be a thing that your spouse may be like, why is he having such a good time and able to live a normal life? So you have to really use judgment.
A feeling is like your life doesn't get to be normal while mine is like I don't even know what tomorrow is going to bring. And I remember saying too, and I actually think I put this in the impact letter, but that whole advice of, and I would say generally this is true, right? In a normal life situation, you go, panic and anxiety is living in the future. Sadness and grief is living in the past. And if we can only live in the present, we can generally find calm, right? And so I would say broadly speaking, that is a truth for many when you live in a safe environment, right? And when everything in your life is stable, actually, that is true. However, I think I said this to my therapist, and I think I put this in the impact statement. I was like, that doesn't work in the beginning stages of betrayal trauma because the present did not feel safe to me. So there was no place to relax. Like, I was processing the past. I was terrified of the future, and I didn't think my present was safe. And so that was not okay advice for me to be like, let me be in the present. No, the present is terrifying, just like processing what happened was terrifying, just like thinking what's going to happen is terrifying. There's no safe place for my mind. And so I think, so what happens is while you are living the lie, I'm living in ignorance, not intentionally, just I didn't know what was happening. Then when you come into truth, I'm processing the lie. Right. And so I think people have to recognize that. And so you had mentioned on the addict side, you're absolutely allowed to be happy. And you have to sort of also balance that with empathy for your partner. The thing that I see with a lot of compassionate, kind women, betrayed partners who care deeply about their addict partners is this sort of internalized pressure of, well, he's in such a good place. I'm not allowed to feel or express the full spectrum of my feelings, my anger, my sadness, my rage, my grief, like all of these like really extreme ends of the spectrum, for fear that it will somehow inhibit his recovery or damage the ability for us to reconcile in some way. Or even holding the belief sometimes that like those emotions themselves aren't healthy. And so I'll kind of share my perspective really quickly, but I'd love to hear yours on that. My perspective is that when you have something like this happen in a relationship, what it does is take you to square one and give you an opportunity to build something completely new that's actually healthy. And so what does that look like, right? You get to show up completely authentically yourself and be seen and accepted for you. But in order for that to happen, that means you have to be honest, not only with yourself, but with your partner about how all of this is making you feel at all times. Now, yes, there are things that we don't want to do. So, there are limits to the expressions of these deep emotions, right? Like I shouldn't be like beating you up because I'm angry at you for hurting me, right? Like it's very inappropriate. But we've shared the story of me smashing the laptop. It was a piece of technology that was used against the relationship. It was a physical expression of deep anger and deep hurt while also not physically hurting you. And it ended up sort of eliminating something that was used in the addiction that was not necessarily needed. It wasn't needed for work or anything like that. So when I think about what is the goal in a relationship after betrayal, it is not to repair the building that was just damaged. It is not to find new bricks and to patch the holes. It is to tear the whole thing down to the ground and build something better. And I don't really believe that we can do that effectively unless we are truly honest with ourselves and brave enough to say, my emotions get to be validated. And my thoughts and my beliefs and my wants in this relationship deserve a voice. And so I think that's very important that betrayed partners feel safe within themselves, but then also within the relationship to communicate clearly and effectively. And I do think, and I sort of mentioned this a second ago when I was saying there are limits to this, right? And that is from either side of the partnership, male or female, husband or wife, addicted or betrayed, you do not want to become the abuser. And so in last week's episode, we were talking about coming from an unhealthy place, an unhealed place leads us to want to control everything.
Mhm.
There is a little bit of a weird sort of like awkward dance as we kind of go through recovery, because in the beginning, there are a lot of things that I took control over, a necessary control that you participated in as part of your recovery. And we
Mhm.
set all these boundaries, and then I had to do this and this and this and this. It was a different part of our relationship, right? Now, betrayed partners should be aware that in a certain sense of the word, that can feel intoxicating. That can become something that you gravitate towards because it gives you a false sense of security. And so we always have to be self-aware and checking our motivations of why we want to do things, where we want to end up, what type of relationship we want to build. So that is 100% true. We have to catch ourselves to not turn into somebody that then becomes controlling and bitter. And it's this negative expression of our pain. Yeah. But I think part of that is by validating and expressing the emotions that do exist, so that then it's not suppressed to the point that it turns into something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So from the addicted part who had to deal, and I showed the full spectrum, hopefully most of the time in a healthy way. I showed the full spectrum, the sadness, the grief, the panic attacks, the anxiety, the rage, the this is your fault, I can't believe it. Also, all the way to the other end of the spectrum of like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I heal more quickly? Why, all this kind of stuff. You feeling so amazing in your recovery, also having to navigate that, share your perspective.
So I think through this, I remember thinking very early on that like I owed it to you, and we talked about this. I owed it to you to tell you the truth as best I can. I also owed it to you to try to do as much as I can to provide safety for you. So like I knew I wasn't gonna,
relapse.
No, yeah, I knew I wasn't gonna relapse. I knew I also wasn't gonna like stand there and let you hit me or whatever. And that was never a threat. Like I knew clearly in my mind, like, if you were going to chase me around the living room with a knife, like that was going to be toxic. But part of me is like,
you're never afraid of that though.
Yeah. Like,
right.
you get yelled at, I got yelled at as a kid. I got yelled at in the army. Sometimes it's like, I used to actually make a joke that like, when I would get yelled at in the military, I'd be like, now I feel alive. But it was just kind of a silly joke. But I was like, I owe that to you, to allow you to get that off of your chest. And then at the same time, driving my own healing forward. Right. So, there were some times when I was happy and I was a little bit like, oops, like I wasn't prepared to have this conversation, you know what I mean? Or whatever. But, as I look back on a lot of those instances, they came when they needed to come, right? And we talked through things that we needed to. And I think I developed pretty early on, and it's always a good thing to say is, okay, what do you need from me right now? What do you need from me right now? And stuff like that. And sometimes that was, can you just go away for a little bit? And then, as I learned, I would go away and like not come back for like, 6 days. I'm just being silly, but like because of my shame response. Versus, hey, I'll go away for 20 minutes and I'm going to come back, And so, it's the other thing is it's important, for the addict to understand the impact of what they've done. That's why they write that's why there's an impact letter, right? That's from the betrayed partner. So, I think of course it would be nice not to have to go through that process. Of course it would be.
In a way, do you feel like, okay, so I know sometimes betrayed partners struggle. So, I mean, it's like the idea of intrusive thoughts, right? Like we know what we want, and then sometimes there's like stuff that pops up, right? And in betrayal and recovery, it's like there might be revenge thoughts. Not that you would ever want to take action on, right? But there's a lot of anger, and and sometimes there might even be get even feelings, right? And just like these really extreme, like you have to pay for what you've done. You need to know like the depth of the pain that you've caused me. And sometimes forgiveness or moving forward can almost feel like letting the addicted off the hook. So in a way, and it's not, I mean, I want to make sure that that's clear, but that's a very, very common feeling that we can go, if everything's fine in 3 weeks, in 6 months, in a year, into even whatever time it is, it can go on a really long time if we're struggling with our own healing, where we go, that's just not fair. You get to go do this bad behavior, and now you're staying married and you're living your life and everything's fine, right? So do you feel like going through me fully expressing in a safe way, but fully expressing the anger, the sadness, all this kind of stuff, do you kind of feel like going through that and experiencing that was, in a sense, experiencing the reality of the consequences?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so then do you feel like there's a benefit in a way for you to go through that experience?
I do, because if you think about, addiction, sex addiction being a disorder, and it's it's really an opportunity. Now you have an opportunity to show up in a way that you've never maybe showed up in your life before. You have the opportunity to step in and say, hey, I understand that I hurt you. How can I help? And then live with that. Well, right now you can just get the heck out of here. But over time that changed. And I think that, you've talked about, that, there was times where I would get frustrated with some things. Like we talked about the story, like, oh, you'll never travel by yourself again. That was like something and that was frustrating, because I was like, well, wait a minute, but that was, I needed to hear that. Because that was born out of your fear. You didn't want me to go off by myself again and engage in the behavior again. Mm-hmm. So we worked through that. Mm-hmm. Like if you really approach your betrayed spouse with your ears open, and you kind of pause your ability to respond by talking and trying to defend yourself, just really listen. It's a real gift. And it's a gift that as you maybe, once again, maybe for the first time in your life, you're doing that again, or doing that translates to a whole bunch of other people, that you can have a better relationship with your father or your son, or, whatever that may be, your coworkers, whatever, when you develop more of a listening posture and a curiosity posture. So I kind of, it would be great for me to be like, I knew exactly what was happening and I was adopting a listening approach, but, because once again, I didn't like it. When I would come home and you had talked to that lady and you were like, give me your phone, and you would go find, I hated that. There were many days
tried several times that we did not handle this perfectly.
Of course not. Yeah.
Not every step throughout the process were we perfect in the relationship. We both made mistakes on both sides.
Yeah, but I think it was important for me to understand that this was not a short-term impact. It was a long-term impact. And I remember you said this at one point. You were like, it's going to take like 10 years or something like that. It'll take like 10 years or something, like, because I had acted out for like, quote unquote, 10 years. Right. And then you were like, so it's going to be 10 years before I ever trust you again. You had said that early on, in your,
did I really?
Yeah, you really did. And I remember, like, as I'm trying to think through it, I'm like, well, is that really wise to go through that thing? But, I never said anything. I wasn't like 10 years. Well, about 8 years, or 4 years, and stuff like that. And so, I actually felt very comfortable that we both had enough bandwidth in our lives to make the best decision for the relationship when it needed to be done. So what I mean by that is, like, if you were just going to be angry for 3, 4, 5 years, just flat out angry, I think that would have led to, hey, we need to talk about this. You know what I mean? Like, this is not healthy. And then what does that mean?
So again, kind of talking about the seesaw of balance between the two people, both individuals have voices in the relationship. And that's very important to be clear about. If you choose the path of reconciliation, absolutely 1,000,000%, you are allowed and have a right to express your feelings and your hurt and your emotions. And there's another person that is a human being in this relationship, even if it's the human being that has hurt you. And so, again, there are limits, and that person that has hurt you also gets a voice.
Right.
And so, there would be times where you'd sort of like check me. I think, not in a negative way. I think the important thing that I want to draw from what you were just saying is empathy from the person that has done the hurting. Because while you do get a voice, if you come out, and then we talk, this is where it all goes wrong, is where the addict goes, I'm not handling any of your emotions. I'm in recovery right now. You shouldn't be feeling this way. And it's me, 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 me. So something that will happen in a healthy relationship is that the betrayed partner will feel safe enough knowing that she's not in any physical or psychological danger because her partner will show up for her, that she is safe enough to express the totality of the pain. And first of all, just the expression of that will help it move through more quickly. And so being in a safe place in the relationship and in order to be doing that. But what will happen is if she feels unsafe, if there's a lot of gaslighting, if there's not empathy, if there's not taking responsibility, if there's a lot of relapsing, all this kind of stuff, that lack of safety will play right into, well, obviously I'm not being heard. So you can go one of two ways with that. I'm either going to shove it all down, which is not going to be healthy mentally, emotionally, or physically, or I'm going to dig in more because clearly I'm not being heard, right? And I'm going to hold on to the control longer. I'm going to hold on to the anger longer. I'm going to, all of these different types of things. And so that's where we've talked about this, I think, in various different ways, but the more quickly the person that has done the hurting can take responsibility and sit through the consequences. And so that's sort of the emotions of your partner are some of the consequences.
Absolutely.
And so the partner needs to feel safe enough to express those to you without feeling like there will be a consequence for her to express those, meaning me expressing my anger isn't going to make you gaslight me. Me expressing my sadness is not going to make you turn around and play the victim so that then I feel bad for you. Me sharing my emotions with you is not going to make you storm out of the house or threaten me or tell me that I will never survive without you because you have all the money or, any of these things. Like that is just abusive.
Right.
And so there is this spectrum of it's very healthy for you to express your emotions and for the other person to hear them in the same way that you sat on the bed telling me the most horrible thing that you'd ever done to me while crying because it hurt you. And in a weird way, I was able to sit there and listen and support you, even though what I was hearing was that you had cheated on me.
Yeah, it was horrific.
And so it is hard. There's no easy way. There will be yelling, there will be crying, all this kind of stuff. But I think it can be done in a healthy, safe way. And I think both partners need to feel safe to voice that because safety is the key. When you feel psychologically safe with your partner, you can work through all that hard stuff. But if you don't feel psychologically safe, like it's my words are going to be manipulated or thrown back at me, or be told that I'm wrong, or you're not going to take responsibility for your part in making me feel this way or any of that, it leads to an escalation, which is obviously the exact opposite of what you want to happen.
Right.
Or it leads to a very unhealthy coping mechanism of pouring it all back inside of me and feeling like, well, this is just, what I have to deal with. And I have to obviously do it myself.
Right.
And so that either one can be.
I've described this story before, and I do remember this is a great example. So we get to 90 days, and I take you out to dinner, and it's so funny.
I think I remember what you're going to say.
And we're sitting there at dinner, and you're just staring at me like with this, like,
oh, 90
how
days.
could you? You know what I mean? I was like, well, this is awkward. You know what I mean? So I'm like.
Rewind though, because I was actually thinking about the time that we went to a store and got IVs and we were sitting at Bonefish. That's the time I thought you were talking about.
Oh yeah, that was yep. But that was a similar type situation.
Let's go into both of those because I think they're both different and good examples of this process. So I don't know how far we were in. It was still pretty early, maybe within 6 months, definitely within the first year. We went to do a fun activity together, which sometimes we go and do, get vitamin IVs or whatever, right next door. And it was at the time that we were traveling down to Cincinnati. So it's like 45 minutes to an hour. So there was a place to eat right next door. So a little bit of a trip. We did that. We spent some time there and then we were like, we're hungry. Let's eat dinner. So we go next door, we eat dinner. I think we had cocktails that night. And so I'm mentally processing. Now, this is the thing. As I'm processing that
was within the 90 days. It just hit me. It was within. It was that early? Yeah, it was that early.
Okay, so as I'm processing my own pain through the beginning phases of this, the other piece that I'm processing is how there's no awareness around this. Nobody's talking about it. Churches are not helping people. This is not something that you see couples out there talking about. And so I'm like processing my own pain, your addiction, the reality that like no one is talking about this publicly, and like what a shame this is, and how negative churches handle this, all this kind of stuff, right? And so I get a little bit of a cocktail in me, and I start like just going off on like how harmful addiction is and how hurtful it is and how the churches should be doing better. And I'm not necessarily doing it to shame you. I'm like, we're on the same team here. We think this is a horrible thing. I'm just like spouting out how evil it is and how like the world needs to do something about it from my memory. And of course, like, in a way, it is about you because.
Yeah, I remember feeling a lot of shame that night.
Yeah,
and
which
it was
makes
just,
sense because it was so early.
and it was really hard, and I was just trying to sit there and listen and stuff like that, and everything. But yeah, it was a.
I do think a lot of it though was just like, this is just like what's going on in the world, and da 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 da, and it's so blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But of course, there was a piece where it's like, and you did this to me,
right?
You know what I mean?
You know, it's interesting. I do remember thinking this, that like, you know, you're talking about space to be able to express. You know, there are some things you got to be careful with as the addict. So, for example, I remember at times thinking internally, like, "Wow, you know, how much longer is this going to go on?" But I didn't say it in the moment, right? Because you know, like, I would go to my groups and say, yeah, my wife was triggered, and you know what I mean? And like, you know, just kind of wondering. And, you know, that's why you go to groups, because you have some really wise folks that say, hey, that's a normal thing. It's okay. You know, and you go, that's awesome. Okay. Thanks for informing me of that. You know what I mean? That's important to have that, because, you know, yes, you want to be able to express where you are, but you know, because emotions fire, right? Emotions fire, and we get limbic, and we just don't, you know what I mean? But it was, you know, the other thing I was going to say through this whole thing is I had done a lot of work at work and in various aspects of my life, which is what made the addiction very hard for me, is I had set visions, right? I'd gotten better about setting a vision of what I wanted to do and all of this stuff. So, unfortunately, my vision of not being an addict on my own didn't realize. When this happened, you know, and when it came out, I remember telling you this, like, I'm going to fix this whether we stay together or not, right? I'm going to fix this in my life. And I wanted to finally be what I've always wanted to be, which was a safe man. And so this process allowed me to work on that, you know, to live into that vision. And I think sometimes addicts don't have a vision, and I'm not criticizing them because it's very hard, but it's like, what is it that where's your direction? What's the true north you're moving towards? Because it helps you
the same thing
in the hard conversations.
Same thing we talked about with the betrayed partner.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a vision, it's going to be a little too easy, I think, to sit in the pain of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And not that that's not valid, you know, in the right circumstance with the right support. But you'll stay there if you don't know where you're going.
Right. You know, the other,
and it can be a temptation for the betrayed partner to hold on to this pain and hold it over their partner's head for the rest of their relationship.
Yeah.
If healing doesn't occur, because again, those emotions make us feel more in control. They make us feel like we have the upper hand. And if we're not careful, that can be an addiction that we can get from this whole process, because we feel validated in it, like it's acceptable.
Yeah.
And so we do have to, that is a big temptation. We have to be careful about that.
And I know through this process, there were a couple times where you were like, I shouldn't talk like that towards you. Like there was one time where you were doing something, and I was kind of like, okay, she's, you know, and you said, I shouldn't talk like that anymore. I shouldn't use that kind of language.
Yeah, but I think,
but it was a long way in. It wasn't like, you know, week 2.
Right, I was going to say with the timeline there, because I think a lot of that comes with, we really are safe. You really have done the work. We really have healed. I need to be careful about my words, because while I can still express in the past how that felt or whatever, I need to not use shaming language currently, right? Like that. And so Yeah. And
Yeah.
I do still sometimes joke about it.
Yeah, I know. And there's this, there's this whole, I'm reading this book called, Having Difficult Conversations. And one of the things they talk about is express how things make you feel. Don't necessarily do a judgment or an attribution. So, you're a jerk, or, hey, your actions really hurt me, right? Because I can't argue with that. If you say I'm a jerk, I'm like, well, no, I'm not. Look at how hard I'm working. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's one of those. So it's a really good
I think
kind of
learning how to
reminder,
communicate.
of how you should approach these things.
Learning how to communicate through this process can be huge, but also practicing that is going to become easier and easier as safety is established, as empathy is involved, because the less safety you have, the more on fire your brain is going to be, and it's going to be harder and harder to have impulse control when it comes to emotions and words and having those types of conversations. And gosh, Lily's going to come up in all of our podcast episodes from now on, because in that episode, we were talking about the idea that it's from the place of calm that you actually have more power, and not power over another person, but internal power. You feel more aligned, and that's where clarity comes in. That's where good conversations and decisions can be made, right? And so I think that kind of plays into that.
Yeah.
The more, like, the quicker the addict can get into not acting out and not relapsing, the quicker they can get into expressing empathy, the quicker they can get into providing safety psychologically for their partner, no gaslighting, no blaming, no defending their behavior, the quicker then typically the partner can come down off of the really extreme emotions and start navigating and dealing with the complexity of it. And then you guys can have safe conversations together. And so that will progress over time. But the quicker you can get into that state of safety, that's going to help. That's going to nurture that. That's going to provide the environment where that's possible. If safety isn't there, everything that we're talking about is going to be incredibly hard, because your brain's going to be activated all the time going, you're dangerous, you're dangerous, you're dangerous, right? And you're a threat to me. And maybe your words are a threat to me, and I anticipate your words being a threat to me, right? And so that's not going to be easy to have a conversation when that's what's going on in your brain.
There's a couple of things that actually helped me through this, and I didn't know I was doing this, but it actually made sense. Craig Rochelle has a new book where he's talking about pre-deciding things. So there was a couple times that as you were angry with me or whatever, kind of early on, I would break eye contact with you and just look down because I was very ashamed. And you expressed that you didn't really like that. So I kind of worked on, I pre-decided what I was going to do in those situations. And one of those was maintain eye contact. Don't, smirk, don't do anything. And I was ready. Even though I was tired or it was 10:30 at night or whatever, I was ready for those situations. And it allowed me, it just gave me, and there's a whole notion to pre-deciding, right? You pre-decide who you're gonna reach out to as a recovering addict when your emotions start to go. You pre-decide that. You don't go, oh my gosh, my emotions are down. Who am I going to reach out to? You already know. You already know who you're going to do that. So that helped me through our interactions, because I had already determined how I was going to respond to you, because they come up at, we used to always joke, like, wouldn't it be great if we could just talk about it between 6 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. and then we could watch a movie and then go to sleep and get a good night's sleep. It just doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of what you're talking about goes into the Bible verse of a gentle answer turneth away wrath, right? And so what does that really mean in this context? It means humility. It's pulling from not only the stories that I hear, but also my own experience with my previous marriage. Lack of humility from the person that has wronged you is like the most infuriating thing. And so when somebody has done something directly to hurt you, or that has hurt you, and then in their words and in the conversations, when you are talking through things or sharing your emotions, and they don't have humility and they don't take responsibility for their behavior, it is like, I kind of felt emotionally crazy when I was going through that. And so even though I would argue that what you did hurt me so much more, and it was so much more dramatic in everything in general, the responses being so dramatically different, my response was dramatically different. And I was able to process. And even though I was angry and everything, like, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where my brain was, and I think it's important to validate people that are in these experiences that maybe are getting gaslit or manipulated. You can feel almost like you are out of control,
right.
because
you become somebody that you aren't familiar with.
Yeah, it's not you. It's not the best version of you. My previous relationship, in many ways, particularly in that end stage, probably throughout the whole marriage, honestly, brought out so many parts of me that were not my highest parts. They were not the good parts of me. And I think when someone lies to your face or doesn't take responsibility for something, or it's not a good partnership, right? Those parts are going to come out, and you can end up doing things that you're not proud of and behaving in ways that you're not proud of, right? And so I think what you're saying here plays so much into that, because you did something in totality that was so much bigger. And yet your response was from a place of humility and empathy and concern. And that immediately, even though the emotions are huge and the pain is great, puts a fire on the crazy in my mind.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's, this process, no doubt, is very hard, and it's very hard. And there are times when you'll go to bed and go, I don't know how we're going to fix this. You just don't. But it's like at the end of the day, you have the opportunity to be something different. I had always kind of, I remember another part of the vision was I wanted you to, if you were like, I just can't do this anymore, but I still like you, like. You know what I mean? Like you were like,
oh yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that I could say that today.
Yeah, I just can't overlook this in my mind. I can't get over it or something like that.
Yeah,
but
if we split for any reason, I highly doubt it'll be because I don't like you as a person.
Yeah, right.
So another thing you had mentioned earlier was men reaching out to their groups. You were saying that in terms of a predetermined step, but I think that. So yes, and this is a complicated conversation, and so we're not going to be able to cover everything in one episode, and we're always going to point you back to your coaches and your therapists and your practitioners, because there's so much nuance and individuality in your particular situation, the types of conversations, the level of safety that you have in your relationship, and everything like that. So this is just very broad spectrum. So I just kind of want to say that, but. While we are talking about both partners having voices and there's limits to each and all this kind of stuff, in a sense, I would say there's a little bit more limitation on the addict in the beginning, kind of what you were saying, because there does need to be such a safety net provided for the betrayed partner that, and we've sort of touched on this in some of the episodes, where while you are sort of like practicing how to use your voice a couple times, it would come off offensive to me. And so I was like, what are you doing? Like, you don't get to like go through this healing process and then come out as some sort of like, I don't know, bossy, controlling, like you don't get to assert yourself and because it can come off very offensively if it's not done well, right? So I think especially in the beginning, the addicted or the person who has done the hurting is going to have to be very, 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 very careful in how they communicate to their partner. And one of the things that you had mentioned was making sure you have the support group. I find myself reminding clients this as well, because it's very important that that you have an outlet. You've got to go somewhere with the frustrations of even as you're navigating the relationship. The addicted partner they might be responding totally empathetically and present and gently with you, and then have all these emotions where they're like, but I'm doing really well, and I'm really frustrated, and I'm tired, and I need help too. And that's okay. We want them to have a place to dump that, not on you.
Right.
And so that's why support groups are so important. I find myself sometimes saying to clients, I'm like, therapy and support groups are really important, because they need to have these constant reminders of things like that, that's normal, but also that healing takes time. They need to be around people that are constantly pouring truth about actual lifelong recovery into them,
Mm-hmm.
that says things like, this is a normal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And here's how to deal with it.
Right.
Here's a healthy way to process this emotion. Yeah, you might feel great at 6 months. You're not done healing. You've got another multiple years to go.
That's right.
I'm glad that you're feeling happy right now. Remember to be patient with your spouse's timeline is not going to be the same. All of these different reminders, they need to be around people that remind them of these truths, because the betrayed partner cannot be the one to constantly do that.
Right.
We cannot be towing the line for our own grief and your recovery all at the same time.
Well, and you always have to love yourself and be aware. We talked, about being self-aware. If you find, either as the addicted or the betrayed, that you react in the same way to a conversation 3 years on that you did early on, I think that's an indicator that there's more healing that needs to be done.
Yeah, there could be a progression.
Yeah, yeah. So like if there's a constant overwhelming need to look through the addicted's phone like every day, you spend 2 hours at the end of every day looking through his phone, and it's 5 years on.
Well, that comes from a place of fear.
Yeah,
and so there's a big question of why is that there?
Right. Yep.
And again, going back to safety, the quicker that can be established,
Mhm.
the more you're going to see that progression over time.
Right. So,
And I think for both people, because these fears are going to show up in different ways for different people. The frustrations, the fatigue, the emotions, the difficulties, right? So we talked about you have pain in the addiction, then you come into recovery and you're happy as a clam that you're in recovery, but now you have the struggle of the consequences,
Right.
and the pain and the frustration of that.
Mhm.
We live in what we think is safety and security, and then all of a sudden our world is destroyed. One thing that I will see sometimes with betrayed partners as well is that they are not only trying to manage their own recovery, they are also trying to get everything set up and manage everything. So it is too much for one person to bear on their own. It's a lot. And so these are such kind, capable, strong women that then are bearing the burden of the addiction, as well as their own grief and their own pain, which is too much. And then they are so compassionate for the fact that it's an addiction that they, kind of going back to the beginning of our conversation, feel that they need to suppress their own pain while they're helping you through it. And so that is where you need to be careful with that, because while your spouse deserves recovery, you do too. And in order to get to a place of total healing, those emotions, that pain, that betrayal needs to feel seen and validated and expressed in healthy ways with the boundaries that we've talked about. But both people deserve to get full ultimate healing. And that is very typically not going to be done in an isolated way without other people. And so finding the groups, finding the coaches and the practitioners and the therapists that can help you through it, navigating this with support, with those reminders of truth, those reminders of recovery, those supports from people that can help you have these difficult conversations, is going to be a pivotal part of the process, I think.
Well, and one of the best things you can do as the addict in that, because you're right, all of a sudden what happens is the spouse has to become the mother or the father to the addict, and that's a really overwhelming spot. You got to check all the finances, you got to do all of these things. So the best bit of recommendation I can give the addict, the recovering addict there this time, is take initiative. Don't turn into a child, as far as, obviously you need support, but where it makes sense to take initiative. Don't skip your support group meetings. Go to your support group meetings. Don't skimp on doing your recovery work. Do your recovery work. All of those things really helps the betrayed spouse.
Don't be dependent on your hurt partner, your betrayed partner, to remind you or prompt you.
Right.
Find that new book on your own.
Yeah.
Find the podcast episode on your own.
Absolutely.
Communicate to your betrayed partner what you're learning in therapy. Communicate to her this podcast episode that you listened and what you learned from it.
Right.
Demonstrate through your conversations and your empathy that your mindset is shifting.
Right.
Demonstrate through your words that you take responsibility and have humility for the pain that you've caused.
Right.
I can't tell you how much seeing a partner be proactive about their own healing helps the healing of the betrayed partner. It allows them to relax just that little bit, just that little bit to begin kind of trusting the process. Because when they don't see that, the question that they have is this ever going to work?
Yeah.
Will they ever take it seriously? Do they actually know the pain that they have caused me? Do they not believe that it's an addiction? Are they only going to therapy because I'm reminding them the day before?
Yeah.
And that's completely valid, because if you take it seriously, you should be taking action on it. And it is a very, very kind thing to do to the person that you've hurt to show them that you're taking it seriously. And so that makes a huge, and I mean tremendous impact in the betrayed partner's mind when they see their partner taking proactive activity. 100% makes a huge difference. Okay, anything else to say about the dichotomy of healing, the happiness, the sadness, how it overlaps and contradicts itself?
I remember this.
There's a lot of confusion through this process.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion, but I remember hearing this, when I was in the Army, what do you do when you're in the middle of suck? Well, you just keep going. You know what I mean? You don't be like, oh my gosh, it's so horrible here. You just keep going. And this, this process, it to be honest, it sucks. It's hard. It's, and so you just got to keep going. Just keep going and keep improving and keep showing up for each other. Once again, as I said earlier, you have a real opportunity to show up for your spouse in a way that maybe you haven't done before. And when you can do that, it builds on itself. All of a sudden you're like, wow, last night I really showed up. And then you can do it again. And then you're like, man, I've been showing up for a month. And then I've been showing up for 6 months. You
can be proud of yourself.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. You start to, those, there's a thing called the virtuous cycle. So, you do a good thing, it leads to another good thing, it leads to another good thing, it leads to another good thing. And so, and that's important all the way through this process.
Well, I think the final thing that I'll leave with everybody is that we're all humans. No one is expecting anyone on either side of this to be perfect. So the best thing that we can do as human beings is learn how to apologize. So we all have limits, and like we've been talking about a lot in this episode, boundaries. It's safe and healthy and important. When it's safe, it's healthy and important to express ourselves and be ourselves. And there's boundaries with how you treat another person, right? And if you ever feel like you weren't aligned in your values and your authenticity, and you maybe overstepped one of those boundaries, even if it wasn't very far, on both sides of that, be willing to come to your partner and apologize and say, I'm sorry that I spoke to you that way. Or I'm so, like, if the addicted partner gets a little defensive, I'm sorry, I'm still new at this, I'm learning, this is how I'm going to work on it. This is how I'm going to apply something different next time we have a hard conversation. And for a betrayed partner, we have a lot of complex emotions through this. And there's definitely times where we might say something that wasn't kind, or say something that we feel like maybe went too far. Right? That was a little too much or whatever. And so if that is true for you and you really feel that, then go to your partner and apologize. It doesn't mean that the emotion itself was invalid. It doesn't mean that your boundary that you were communicating in that moment is invalid. None of that is true. But there are ways of expressing and behaving that can be too much that we need to take responsibility for on both sides. And so I think one of the most healing things through this process is if you have two people that are willing to come from that place of taking individual responsibility for how they show up in the world, and being willing to acknowledge that with their partner as they continue this process. Then you can practice that as your relationship improves, as the safety improves, as the empathy deepens, as you become two healthy individuals leading a healthy life that I promise eventually ends up where you guys are not constantly thinking about betrayal and addiction anymore.
Right. Absolutely.
I can say that we're in that place, and it is a good place to be.
And you go to Greece and you have a good time.
Exactly. We hope this episode has been helpful. We will talk to you next week.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.